SummerSlam is nearly here. Hope you're ready for the biggest party of the summer. It doesn't matter if you're ready. We've covered SummerSlam a lot on the channel because, obviously it's SummerSlam, you fucking idiots. And as such, we've covered SummerSlam plans that almost happened, like Wyatt's versus Justin Bieber, no seriously, or controversial moments like the Ultimate Warrior nearly no-showing SummerSlam 91 and getting suspended for it. So it's hard to find news stories to tell you about WWE's second biggest annual pay-per-view without repeating ourselves, but thankfully, we're great. Honorable mention, WWE would like you to forget that the main event of SummerSlam 2004 featured Chris Benoit. I know it's a huge thing to forget, but I don't want to keep doing entries about Benoit in these forget videos because you guys know what happened. Anyway, I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 things WWE want you to forget about SummerSlam. Number 10, the first ever SummerSlam match ended in a draw. SummerSlam 1988. The first ever slam had some huge moments, biggest of all, the Ultimate Warrior destroying the Honky Tonk Man. How do you close the first ever SummerSlam? Why? With the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. Hogan, Savage, Andre, DiBiase, Miss Elizabeth's bum. All the big stars were out. It was truly a main event worthy of an institution. But what about the first match? That was a tag match pitting the British Bulldogs versus the Fabulous Rougeau brothers, which ended in a time limit draw. The British Bulldog threw the Dynamite Kid onto Jacques Rougeau, and the pin was set to be counted when the bell rang seemingly out of nowhere. Then the draw was announced and the fans went from confusion to boos. Now don't get me wrong, the first match was good and non-finishes have their place when building a feud, but to end the first ever SummerSlam match on a pay-per-view no less, with the fans loudly rejecting the result, is something to leave off the SummerSlam highlight reel. Number 9, SummerSlam 1992 was taped. 80,355 fans packed into the Wembley Arena in 1992 to see the first and only Big Four WWE pay-per-view emanating from the UK. It's an absolutely treasured edition of SummerSlam, especially over here obviously, where the British Bulldog holding the belt has replaced the Queen on our £10 notes. However, what you may not know is it took place on a Saturday. It's one of the few pay-per-views in WWE history that wasn't live. Now if you hear WWE talk about their pay-per-views, they will always mention how they are live, exclusively on pay-per-view or on the WWE network for an undisclosed sum. It's something we've heard for the past 30 years. They like to drive that point home because it's their way of telling fans that what they're going to see is happening right as they're watching it. When companies tape shows and show them a few days later, they don't brag about it. And with the internet being the box of vicious frogs that it is, taping a major show like SummerSlam, especially one with a huge finish, is absolutely unthinkable. Number 8, Flair versus Savage. Randy Savage fought Ric Flair for the big championship not once but twice at Big Vincent's House of Incidents. On tape, they fought each other for the belt all the bloody time on house shows in 1992, mostly with Ric Flair losing via DQ. They fought once at WrestleMania 8 with Savage beating Flair, and one more time on Prime Time Wrestling with Flair beating Savage. But what you may not know, and what WWE may want you to forget, is that they were scheduled to clash 3 years earlier. Originally, Vince wanted, as the main event of the first SummerSlam, Ric Flair to challenge Randy Savage for his WWF Championship. However, in his book, To Be the Man, Flair said he felt indebted to the National Wrestling Alliance, who'd made him a megastar, and he rejected WWF to stay with the NWA. As big as the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks was, Flair versus Savage, peak Flair at that, could have been even bigger, and it stings that Flair wouldn't come over to the company. Number 7, Michaels Razor 2 was almost Michael's Sid. 1995 was a difficult year for SummerSlam. It was aging awkwardly with weird tufts of hair sprouting all over its body, and it had started getting weird, erotic thoughts. It was a clumsy, ineffective event on the most part, headlined by Diesel versus King Mabel, off-cited as the worst main event in the institution's history. However, it did have one shining jewel in its crown: Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon 2, the rematch of the stellar ladder match they had at WrestleMania 10. However, that wasn't the match originally planned. Instead, it was meant to be Shawn Michaels versus Sid, continuing their rivalry from WrestleMania 11. That match was actually advertised as well before it got changed. Now, the match wouldn't have been bad. The two men had a good match at Survivor Series 1996, for example, but evidently Vince looked at his card and knew it needed something special. SummerSlam 95 being in such a position that they needed to parachute a ladder in to save the day is not exactly something to be proud of. Number 6, the Mountie getting sexually assaulted in prison. In 1991, the Mountie, aka the least polite Canadian of all time, the guy who had a habit of shouting and tasering people while comedy electricity sound effects would play, he fought the Big Boss Man in a jailhouse match, a stipulation for which dictating that the loser would have to spend a night in jail. The Mountie lost and was hauled off to the pokey where a series of funny skits would play. He was bundled into the police car, kicking and screaming, ha ha ha. He refused to have his prints taken, but they took one of the the middle finger he showed them. Ha ha ha. Then a gay biker cornered him and heavily implied he was about to sexually assault him against his will, and oh. Not only that skit aired right after the final match, after Hogan and Warrior beat the Triangle of Terror, a great big rape joke. And then Randy Savage and Elizabeth got married. What? Sure, it was a, quote, difficult time, and the idea of men being, well, fucked against their will in prison was a bit more gigglesome than it is today, but still, it is very much not ideal. Number 5, Randy Savage and Elizabeth were already married. And speaking of SummerSlam 91, this is something we've recently covered in the SummerSlam Greatest Moments series, but not as many people watched that, so shut your damn mouths. It was a special moment, the wedding between Macho Man Randy Savage and his longtime manager Miss Elizabeth. The match made in heaven, they called it, a title given extra significance by the sad fact that neither of the couple are still with us today. It was a great moment and a rare example of a wedding not being ruined, if you don't count Jay Roberts hiding a snake in the wedding presents, but that didn't air live, so I don't. Now, what WWE might want to forget about this moment is not just that Randy Savage and Elizabeth were already married in real life and had been for 7 years, but actually, at the time of the wedding, their real relationship was slowly coming to an end, with the two real-life divorcing just 1 year after tying the knot in public. Number 4, Jackass vs. Umaga. This one's weird. No, you see, Swerved is not the WWE's first dealing with the Jackass crew. Back on an episode of Raw in October 2006, Steve-O and Chris Pontius, move over Pacitti, he's the original party boy, were memorably beaten down by Umaga, who got legitimately pissed off that Steve-O ignored the script and laughed instead of selling the attack. WWE then planned to turn that incident into a major angle in the summer of 2007. The Jackass boys, including Pontius, Steve-O, Johnny Knoxville, Wee Man and Bam Margera, were set to clash with Umaga and possibly some other WWE stars in a big hardcore stunt match at SummerSlam. The company eventually backed down from the angle, possibly to avoid accusations of being crass and dangerous in the wake of the Benoit tragedy. The most incredible thing about this whole scenario? The Jackasses were booked to go over Umaga on the pay-per-view. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Number 3, Eddie Guerrero losing his shit at Vicky. It feels weird that the bit about this match that WWE would like you to forget isn't the bit where two grown men are fighting for the custody of a small boy. So it's 2005 and Eddie was claiming to be the biological father of Rey Mysterio's kid. A standard feud, I think Orton and Lesnar are doing it for their match this year. And the two men fought in a ladder match with custody papers in a briefcase. Towards the end of the match, Rey was pinned underneath the ladder as Eddie climbed. And then suddenly, when he got to the top, Eddie couldn't get the briefcase down. He stood there at the top, fiddling with the release, giving the briefcase a shake, before Mysterio finally managed to turn the ladder over. Then Eddie starts to bang the mat in frustration. You can hear a weird edit in the sound. Why? Because WWE have edited out Eddie screaming, "Where the fuck was Vicky?" You see, Vicky Guerrero was supposed to enter at that point and stop Eddie Guerrero from retrieving the briefcase, but for some reason missed her cue, and gosh, Eddie looked really cross. Number 2, a fan nearly ruined the end of Undertaker vs. JBL. SummerSlam 2004 suffered from a difficult old crowd. In Toronto, Canada, or Bizarro Land as Jerry Lawler would call it, they were just a little bit Smarky and George, booing faces, cheering heels and the like. During the JBL Undertaker match for the WWE title, one of the fans, who probably had a few too many to drink, decided to hop the barricade. Never a good idea if you like your teeth not being hoyed down your throat. Instead of trying to enter the ring, the fan ran and jumped onto the roof of JBL's limousine. What this categorical jagoff didn't know was that a portion of the roof was gimmicked and rigged to collapse on impact for a big spot post-match. Acting quickly, WWE security caught the fan before he could fall through the car's ceiling, and the chokeslam through the roof spot went as planned, but WWE were seconds away from the angle being ruined and maybe a lawsuit on their hands. And number 1, it's a miracle SummerSlam 1992 was good. So we're back at Wembley. The main event is why people will never forget SummerSlam 1992. I mean, I really don't think it's because of Nails versus Virgil or Tatanka versus the Berserker, the latter of which was actually cut from the US release of the pay-per-view. Nope, it's the British Bulldog and Bret Hart main event, with Bulldog toppling Hart to an ovation that has never quite been matched. It's a bout that's often been voted the best in SummerSlam history, but what WWE would like you to forget is that it was very nearly a complete disaster. As Bret described in his book, Bulldog had spent much of the summer on the bench and had developed a pretty serious drug problem. The hitman, who had handpicked Bulldog to have a classic match with, was a teensy bit miffed. The British star turned up to SummerSlam having not slept for 48 hours, completely out of shape and having forgotten all of the spots. Bret had to call the whole thing to him in the ring, and thanks to an Herculean effort from the excellence of execution, the match went as planned and became a masterpiece. Bret has called carrying his brother-in-law to a classic his greatest in-ring accomplishment. And that's our list. Did we miss any out? Tell us about it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter here. I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon. you one of the unlucky few who couldn't get tickets for July's WCPW tapings? Well, make sure you pick up tickets for August, as they're already extremely limited. On August 24th, we'll be presenting a special live pay-per-view quality show, WCPW Stacked, featuring Moose versus Joe Coffey, the debut of the Women's Championship, Will Ospreay versus Marty Scurll. The WCPW Championship will be on the line. There'll be Joe Hendry, Joseph Connors, Big Damo, El Ligero, Primate, Grado, Drew Galloway, EC3, and GM'd by Eric Bischoff. Not just that, but on the 25th, we'll also be holding loaded tapings featuring the Kurt Angle Invitational, a pinfall and submission elimination rumble to decide who gets to face the Olympic hero in October. Grab your tickets for August at wc.pw while you still can. The 2 days are looking absolutely stacked.